Hi everyone, so today we worked on a song using some of the more out there programs on the H90. A lot of you have been wondering how to apply these programs in a musical context, so I thought it'd be fun to demonstrate how to do just that. So for this tune I used a bunch of different instruments, but I really wanted to feature the bass. I wanted that to be the foundation of this song. So for that I used the Ernie Ball Music Man DarkRay 5. Big shout outs to our friend from Ernie Ball Music Man for sending this over for us to try out. The really cool thing about this guitar is that it has dark glass built into it, meaning that I can take the dark glass fuzz or distortion and run that into the H90 to create a really cool reverbed out sound. I'm also going to be using this beautiful D'Angelico Deluxe Brighton running in through the H90, and then from there stereo out into the Universal Audio Dream. It's just a really nice clean amp platform. For the drums, we used the Arturia Drumbrute Impact to get that nice tight 808 sound. You'll also hear some really cool synth textures, and we used the Mo Grandmother. And finally, we used a couple virtual instruments, mainly the Arturia Stage and Piano, through the Arturia Keylab 61. The H90 is being used in most of these setups, either as a DAW insert or as a pedal running straight into the interface or through the Dream. Now that you know what we used for the song, check out how we made it. So, like I said before, I wanted the bass to be the foundation of the song, and at least for the first part of the song, I had it on the red channel of the DarkRay 5, giving us this nice fuzz tone built into the bass. And then I'm running that into a program called Freeman. Freeman is a sculpt algorithm going into a wormhole, which is this massive reverb tone, and the sculpt is just adding a little bit more bite into it. I backed up the hot knob around 50 or 60, which toggles and, kind of adjust a few different parameters, giving it a little bit more dry tone rather than it being fully wet. Okay, so for the second part of this song, I change up the bass tone. I switch the bass to the blue channel, giving it a little bit of more clean sound, especially since I backed off the blend. I ran that into the H90 using a program called Bass Phase. Since I was using a lot of chords, I thought this was a nice program to use since it gave it that sort of Thundercat style tone. So for the drums, I wanted a nice and tight 808 sound. The Drumbrute Impact was able to get us there really well, and Colin was able to program a really cool groove. Where it gets really interesting is how we utilized the H90 with the Drumbrute Impact. So the H90 is being used as an insert on the DAW, so I could combine it with my 808 sounds on the Drumbrute. For the intro, I created this new program called Drumhead, which is basically a QA going into headspace. I mapped the hot knob to create a really extreme filter sweep on the H90 in QA to kind of let the sound in and out, let it ebb and flow, and then the boil on headspace creates this really gnarly feedback. Then for the breakdown, Colin created this cool program called glitch switches. It's a reverse parallel to an ultra tap, and then he mapped the hot switches, all three of them, to change the feedback and the number of taps on either of the algorithms. Since the H90 is plugged into the computer via USB-C, I can select it as a MIDI source in Pro Tools, and then, using Pro Tools only, I can send MIDI CCs to the H90, letting me turn on and off all those different hot switches to create a really cool texture. So I'm primarily a guitar player, but for this song, I actually found that it's probably my most underutilized instrument and really just serves as a nice texture for the piece overall. So the first thing I did with guitar is used a preset called Jet Fuzz, and about the second half of the first part of the song, it's this super gnarly distortion, which is pitch fuzz going into a phaser, and you really don't even hear the notes moving, but it adds this really cool kind of like swirly sound. Check it out. On the second part of this tune, where it starts to get energetic and a little bit faster, I used a few different programs. You might hear a really cool wah groove. That's where I used a program called Auto Wah, which is just QA going into SP 2016. I also used a program called Awaken, which is polyphony going into tricera-chorus. It kind of creates this really sophisticated sounding chords because you're transposing it down a fifth and up a fourth, but polyphonically. So you could play a seventh chord or just a straight bar chord, and it's going to create a pretty jazzy sounding chord. Finally, at the end of the song, I tracked a few harmonizing guitar lines through this program called Shoegazer, which is Weed Whacker going into Black Hole. Sounds like this. We also added a few different virtual instruments and synths into this song. I thought it really required a nice leady texture. So I got a lot of help from my colleague Colin Bevan because he's really more of the synth head than I am. And for the lead synths that you hear all over the song, mainly in the first part, we used the Moog Grandmother. We used the H90 with the Grandmother using a program called Instant Flavor. It's Instant Flanger parallel to Instant Phaser, and then we set both of those algorithms to wide mode. It's a pretty subtle effect, but it adds just the right amount of modulation and flavor into the tone that the Grandmother is giving to us, and then I added some Black Hole in post using the Black Hole plugin. And then we added a few virtual instruments, mainly at the end of the song. We used the Arturia Keylab 61 to control the piano and the stage, which is like a Rhodes virtual instrument. And then finally, I used the Misha to track a cool piano solo using samples from the Disting EX. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I ran the Misha into the H90 and set the Misha to E minor pentatonic and chord mode, which is set to jazz. And then on the H90, I was using a program called Wide and Clean. So we pretty much covered everything we used on the song, and at the end of it, using these more out there programs, I think we were able to create something that's through composed, but still really, really cool. And I hope you like it. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. Huge shout out to Colin Bevan, who was a huge part of making this song. And I also want to dedicate this episode to the late and great Peter Freeman, who really inspired so much of this tune and so much of the effects that we used on this song. He was a great friend of ours, and we miss him. So, see you in the next episode. Have a good one.